Namaste, everyone, and welcome to our June Liberation Baithak. We are honored to have with us today Hindus for Human Rights Advisory Board member Rajmohan Gandhi. Rajmohan ji is a distinguished historian, biographer, and public intellectual whose work engages deeply with questions of democracy, nonviolence, and interfaith understanding. A former member of the Rajya Sabha, he has taught politics and history at institutions including the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, IIT Gandhinagar, IIT Bombay, and Michigan State University. The grandson of Mahatma Gandhi and C. Rajagopalachari, his writing reflects a lifelong engagement with the ethical and political challenges of modern India. He is the author of several acclaimed works, including biographies of Gandhi, Sardar Patel, and Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan. In today's Liberation Baithak, we will be discussing his latest book, Do You Know Your Hinduism? Notes for Modern Day Hindus, that reflects on the meaning of Hinduism in the contemporary world. Welcome and blessings to all. As always, the viewpoints of our panelists are their own and do not represent the official position of Hindus for Human Rights. A small note of housekeeping, please put your questions into the Zoom feature or chat, and our dear Mayank will help us get to them if we can at the end. And if we don't get to them, we will get to them in the Chota Baithak, the discussion group we always have after Liberation Baithak. And because Rajmohanji is so close and so dear to us, the conversation may be more intimate than other Baithaks often are. And I don't want to rush this important conversation. So forgive us if we go over the allotted time, but we'll try not to. So welcome, Rajmohanji. We met, first of all, in DC 7 years ago when Hindus for Human Rights was just months old, a little baby organization, in the fall of 2019. You immediately liked the idea of Hindus for Human Rights, and you were the first person to join our advisory board. Hindus for Human Rights and Indian American Muslim Council, our partner, we were collaborating on an event with you at Georgetown University. And you and Ushaji were so interested in knowing about Hindus for Human Rights, our mission, our aspiration, and the pain and the anguish that led to our founding. And from then on, all of us in Hindus for Human Rights, and me personally, have felt we have a strong mentor and a friend in you. I've personally spent time with you in DC, New York, Urbana-Champaign, New Haven, Panchgani in India, and London. And we were so grateful that you were with us at the launch of Hindus for Human Rights UK. So before we turn to the book, Rajmohanji, I want to begin with you. In our many conversations over the years, you've often referred to what you call the Almighty. We have talked about your brother, Ramchandra Gandhi's deeply faith-rooted book, Sita's Kitchen. Can you talk about your own relationship to Hinduism and faith and how it has evolved in your lifetime? And why did you think it was important to write this book on Hinduism and for a Hindu readership?
Thank you, Sunita. And may I extend my greetings to all those who have joined. I can't see you, but perhaps I hope you can see Sunita ji and you can see me and listen to us. It's wonderful to be together today. Now, you ask about my own personal attitude to the Hindu faith. So let me try and give some kind of a response. My childhood and boyhood occurred a long time ago, in the 1930s, 1940s, early 1950s. My parents, my father a Gujarati, my mother a Tamil speaker, raised my siblings and me in Hindi-speaking New Delhi, where our father was a newspaper editor, editing the Hindustan Times, the city's leading newspaper. And our mother was a homemaker, fully involved in what was going on in the city and in the country. Now, what was going on until 1947 was, of course, the struggle for India's freedom from British rule, which is also European rule or white rule. When I was a 6-year-old, it was World War II time, two British officers, police officers in uniforms, came to our apartment, arrested my father because he had refused to reveal the name of the reporter who had written a story the British did not like. Now, I knew I was a Hindu for a couple of reasons. Volumes of the Ramayana and the Mahabharata in Hindi were easily available on a shelf, and I enjoyed reading them. Secondly, my mother seemed to spend a few short minutes by herself every morning, lighting a diya or a little lamp in front of a picture from a Tirupati painting. Now, the fact that partition was being demanded at this time in the early 1940s by the Muslim League, that my parents seemed troubled by the demand, also confirmed my awareness that I was a Hindu in another sense. I belonged to the Hindu community. It also told me that being a Hindu or being a Muslim involved you in political disputes. It was more than a quiet or personal matter. You are also asking why I wrote this book 80 years after that childhood, boyhood. Today, Hindus are circling the earth, circling the globe. We are interacting with the rest of humanity as never before. In some cases, Hindus are marrying with non-Hindus or are in relationship with non-Hindus, and simple understandings of Hinduism have become essential. So this is some very short word on why I'm writing this book.
Thanks, Rajmohanji. If my first question was about you, my second is about someone who is a constant by your side, somebody who never wants the attention, so she might be upset with me, your soulmate and dynamic life partner, Usha Gandhi. I've seen with my own eyes how she actively partners with you in every way, including as a thought partner and fellow researcher. We'll soon discuss your other book, also just published, which is James Lawson, Teacher of Satyagraha, just a bit later. And in that book, you call Usha ji co-creator of the book. So please spend a few minutes. Tell us about your brilliant wife and what was Ushaji's role, if any, in this particular project of the book on Hinduism.
Well, Usha and I have been married for 51 or 52 years. She has been the co-creator of each of my books. I perhaps have done about 16 or 17 by now. She has researched them along with me. In the early part of my book writing life, I didn't have access to, or I couldn't use computers. I used to type my first drafts and then edit them, and Usha would then retype them and retype them and retype them several times. And we did our research together in many archives, many libraries in different parts of India and then in other parts of the world. And she has helped me sharpen my arguments, clarify my words, and by questioning me and insisting on clarity, she has helped in so many different ways. But above all, she wants a world of friendship, of equality, of mutual respect. So I look up to her. Her commitment to fight for a more just world for all the human beings in it is a tremendous inspiration for me. So I am a very, very lucky man. And my biggest good fortune is Usha.
So beautiful. I'll move on. That's really beautiful. And it's apparent to anybody who has met the both of you. In this book, you ask a deceptively simple question: do we know our Hinduism? In the book, you quote Hinduism Today, and you list a set of criteria that define a Hindu: the belief in one supreme being, the divinity of the Vedas, the cycle of birth and rebirth, the law of karma, the reincarnation of the soul, the necessity of a guru to guide seekers, respect for all paths, all religions as equally valid, and there are a few more. And then you say, a Hindu can adhere to only some or even none of these criteria and still be considered Hindu. The chaplain of Georgetown University at the time of the event we did together in 2019, Brahmachari ji, once said to me, being Hindu means questioning everything and following no one blindly. And so, what does it actually mean to know Hinduism today and be Hindu? And do you think it's more important today than at other times that Hindus engage this question? And is that why you have written this book?
I want to enable modern day Hindus to tell themselves what Hinduism is and to convey that understanding to anyone who's interested, anyone who wants to know or needs to know what Hinduism is. I think we should start by recognizing that Hinduism is strongly and deeply linked to one part of the world, to the region many of us know as South Asia. Although many in the US, where we are talking, have a hard time figuring out what South Asia is or where it is. An Indian is likely to be a Hindu. A Nepali is also likely to be a Hindu. A decent percentage of people in Sri Lanka and Bangladesh are also Hindu. A smaller percentage in Pakistan are Hindus. All the Hindus of Guyana, Suriname, Trinidad, Fiji, in the Pacific, Hindus living in noticeable numbers in different parts of Africa, all these Hindus are, almost all of them, of Indian origin. Now, it is common for all of us to run into Africans who are Christian or Muslim. How often do we find Africans who are Hindu? How often do we find Latin Americans who are Hindus? Of course, there are many in Latin America of Indian origin who are Hindus. How many of what is called the white race, the European race, the Caucasian race, call themselves Hindu? A very small number. This strong equation of Indians or South Asians with Hinduism is what has caused scholars over time to call Hinduism an ethnic religion. Now, Tulsi Gabbard, who recently resigned from her post in the US, she is a notable exception. She is a white woman whose mother first became a convert, and she herself has adopted Hinduism. And so she is an exception, and her exception reminds us of the general rule, the broad equation that Hindu equals Indian or Indian equals Hindu. Of course, there are so many Indians who are Muslims or Christians or Sikhs or Jains. Now, it makes sense to distinguish between the races of India on the one hand, and the philosophies or religions to which India has given birth. India has given birth to Hinduism, to Jainism, to Buddhism, to Sikhism, to other ideas. So if Hinduism has ideas that are distinct from the Indian race, from Indian genes, from Indian blood, if Hinduism is more a matter of belief and ideas than just of blood and genes, then we should know what those core ideas are. So that is the question that my little book tries to ask.
At one point in the book, you ask, what is a quintessential Hindu value or gesture? And you say a Christian act is, if someone says a Christian act, you immediately think of an act of charity. A Sikh langar, we all know everybody is welcome. It excludes no one. And then you quote your grandfather, Rajaji, as saying, Muslim faith is undiluted faith. And so in the book, you ask, what does a Hindu way of being look like in practice? What qualities should it reflect in how we relate to others or to society? And you suggest, after much reflection, that, and I quote, a Hindu approach to any other human being is an approach of acceptance, respect, and goodwill. And you suggest that this can be the Hindu approach, our signature feature. Can you talk more about this, particularly in light of the fact that the Hindu community today is far from embracing this approach, but in fact seems hell-bent on a much more divisive and exclusionary direction?
Well, Sunita, let's not blame the entire Hindu community or the entire Hindu population of India for the exclusionary, often coercive, at times domineering words and deeds of Hindus of the extreme right. Let us categorically, without any hesitation or qualification, separate Hinduism from Hindu nationalism, of which majoritarianism, revenge against historical wrongs, and Hindu victimhood are major components. These are major components of Hindu nationalism, or of Hindutva as it's called. Hinduism has to be rescued from Hindu nationalism. So that is a paramount need. It is too wonderful, too beautiful, too magnificent, too noble, too decent a thing to be appropriated by Hindu
Yeah.
nationalists. So it has to be rescued. That's why they attempt to write this book.
And of course, we agree, and that's exactly what we are trying to do in Hindus for Human Rights.
And I may add also, as you have already implied this, so if we think of Hindu as an individual or a Hindu community or a Hindu temple or a Hindu book, it is something, it is a noun, it is a thing, it is a Hindu thing. But we don't often think of a Hindu action, a Hindu act, a Hindu gesture. So this is what I want us to figure out. What should be the Hindu way of living, the way we treat our fellow human beings on earth? What is the Hindu way of treating fellow human beings? That is the question that I would like all Hindus to ask themselves.
And I really do deeply agree with where you landed in that questioning, that a core principle in Hinduism is that God is in you and me, no matter who you are, which means that is the respect and the acceptance and the love with which we greet whoever shows up in front of us. And if that can be the signature of how a Hindu moves in the world, well, we would be in a very different place. But the Hindutva forces must be separated from Hinduism for sure, but they are doing their work, their mischievous or, work, destructive work in the space of Hindu worship and practice. And so Hindus are falling prey, even though they are not part of those Hindutva forces deep down, they are falling prey to this kind of thinking. And your book and our effort as an organization is an attempt, as you say, to rescue this beautiful Hindu faith from this dangerous ideology. But I want to ask you, we've been at it for 7 years. Hindus for Human Rights is 7 years old. And in a I'm 58. My whole life I've been involved in human rights work. Many of our audience who's listening have devoted their lives to human rights and social justice. And when you look at what's happening in India, in America, around the world, it seems to be going in the opposite direction to where we want it to be going. And so can I ask you to spend a few more minutes reflecting on this question, and how can we rein it in and turn it in the direction we are hoping for it to go?
If I had an easy answer to your question, Sunita, I would uh, feel very, very glad indeed. Of course, I don't have an answer to this. And as you rightly point out, while the Hindu world is facing this very difficult question, so is every other part of the world. I mean, look at the wonderful Jews we know, the Jewish world, what they feel about Palestine, what they feel about what is happening in Israel today. And likewise, the Muslim world, likewise, the Buddhist. I mean, look at Burma, look at the Buddhist and other parts of the Buddhist world. So this pain, this very difficult question is before all of us, humanity. And we Hindus must do our best within our Hindu world. But I think this is and why this blight has descended on our planet at this stage is beyond me. That is not a question I will try to answer. I accept the blight, I accept the pain, but I welcome the struggle.
Yes, and we are in struggle with you. Rajmohanji, you are a historian, and you make an important distinction between learning from the past and seeking to avenge it. Where do you think this contemporary impulse toward grievance and revenge comes from? And how do historical narratives shape what some describe as Hindu victimhood today?
Well, that's a very, very important question. I'm grateful that you ask it. Now, those of us who have recently been in India or who live in India know that this torrent of propaganda of Hindutva, Hindu nationalism, anti-Muslim, anti-Christian, this torrent of propaganda has been of immense proportions. Big budget, spectacular movies preach this line. Campaigns with seemingly limitless resources seek to demolish centuries-old mosques and dargahs allegedly built on temple grounds and to raise temples in their place. The campaign to rename cities, to rename roads, to rewrite history books, to change the syllabus in schools and universities. The political power acquired by the Hindu far right. Now, all this has not persuaded millions of Hindus yet to hate Muslims, but it has made open dissent harder and riskier than it has ever been. Yeah. So merely because millions of Hindus are not on the streets protesting against this does not mean that they subscribe to this. They're all of us, they're like all of us, they're human beings, they have relatives, they have assets, small assets, big assets. They don't want to risk everything. And so we should not mistake their silence as any kind of acceptance. And, you know, this cockroach phenomenon that you spoke of is a very hope-giving instance that young people are now feeling that it's a bit too much now, and we got to do something about it. And absolutely no accountability. Boys, girls have to commit suicide, have to take these exams again and again, and you know what taking this exam means for parents, for families, for youngsters. And no one says that I should pay a price and go. So all this is making some kind of a change. But to return to your question about this revenge business and history rewriting, I agree that we have to have a more truthful understanding of our history. No doubt there were centuries of rule by Muslims who initially came from outside India. Initially they came from outside India, but they all made India their home. They became Indian. And throughout Muslim rule, and despite discriminatory policies by some rulers, some Muslim rulers, Hindus continued to flourish in India during Muslim rule. Hinduism continued to flourish in India during Muslim rule. Hindus were not defeated or humbled by Muslim rule. It's very important for Hindus to recognize this. Yes, there was Muslim rule, which to begin with was alien rule. Soon it became Indian Muslim rule, but it was all right, ruled by the Muslims. But did Hinduism collapse? There was absolutely no sign of that. Hindus flourished, Hinduism flourished, Hindus were not defeated or humbled. The expansion of Hindu ideas, of Hindu practices, Hindu wealth, Hindu numbers never ceased, never stopped. However, there's another truth from history which is less flattering. Now, our ancestors, our Hindu ancestors, were magnificent and pioneering in many areas, in mathematics, in astronomy, in medicine, and other areas. Absolutely amazing. I mean, even this idea of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, that the world, humanity is one, centuries ago. The truth may be one, but people share it differently centuries ago. I mean, we can be proud that our ancestors had this incredible insight into humanity. But another truth from history is less flattering. Despite what I have mentioned about astronomy, mathematics, medicine, philosophy, our ancestors were less successful in creating and maintaining a kingdom or a political state over the bulk of India's large space. Yes, there was Chandragupta and his grandson Ashoka. And for a while they ran a wonderful large state. Some centuries later, the Mughals ruled over a large chunk of India, and then the British ruled over. But the centuries when India was not in one large piece, when India was split into many pieces, those centuries outnumber the centuries when most of India was ruled as one entity. This is very, very important for us to recognize and face and ask, why was this? Why did our ancestors fail for such a long time, despite their wonderful achievements in so many spheres? Why couldn't they keep most of India in one piece? Now, you may have met him, perhaps not, because he died about 20 years ago. Baba Amte from Maharashtra. He was famous for his care of leprosy patients. Baba Muralidhar Amte. He died in 2008 at the age of 93. He used to say something like this. He said, while Quit India was a wonderful slogan against British rule, the slogan that Free India requires is Knit India, K-N-I-T, Knit India. How can Hinduism assist in knitting India together? Can Hindus who now live all over the planet assist in knitting the globe together is the question we should be asking. If Hindus in India, Hindus all over the world ask, how can we knit people together? Now, many in our world, in India and all over the world, have sharp and negative opinions about other groups. Mm-hmm. But we don't take the time to have knowledge of these other groups. If the now globe-spanning Hindus make it our business to study the people amidst whom we live, if we listen to them, if we read about them, we might help toward knitting the world together.
And this is something I'm sure that your other grandfather, Mahatma Gandhi, would have said. And your work, including this book, often does return to Gandhiji, whose every fiber was Hindu per his own words. We can't really have this conversation that we're having without, deeply considering Gandhiji's contributions and just what the defining features of Gandhiji's understanding of Hinduism was, and what. And so my question is, would you agree that, what Gandhiji how he would answer that question, for instance, about knitting together the people of India, but also the global diaspora of people of Indian origin? What would he say about that? And why does Gandhi matter in this present moment?
But before I answer that, allow me to say and repeat, I want the Hindus of the world to knit together not just the Indian diaspora. I want them to knit together the entire global family, the non-Hindus of all kinds as well as the Hindus. Now, so what was Gandhi's understanding of Hinduism? First of all, and this connects also to the question of Hindu nationalism, it was an absolutely fundamental principle of his from a very early age that India belongs to everyone and not just to the Hindus. That the Muslims, the Parsis, the Christians, the Buddhists, the atheists, the Sikhs, everybody had the same right to be an Indian, to feel proud as an Indian as Hindus have. So this was one of his cardinal understanding of Hinduism, that Hindus did not own India, that Hindus are proud to share India with non-Hindus, one. Secondly, of course, and this we know from his Ishwar Allah Tere Naam, that the Almighty is one, even though people describe him in different names. Allah is your name, Ishwar is your name, Shiva is your name, Vishnu is your name, and so many names in the rest of the world. That the Almighty, that we perhaps no one may, few may have seen the Almighty ever, but we have a grasp of some tremendous force in the world that doesn't always answer our prayers, that sometimes takes an enormous time to deal with terrible tragedies. But there is something wonderful and kind and generous about this force in the world. And so Gandhi's Hinduism was very clear that the Almighty can be given different names. People may have different conception of the Almighty, the merciful, the kind, powerful, the forgiving, and that should not prevent us then from being real friends with those who may not share the word we use for the Almighty. They may not use the songs we sing in praise of the Almighty. They may do it in their own way, but that they are also absolutely part of us. And also another important understanding of Gandhi's Hinduism is when it comes to women. Of course, the caste question was very important, and he made the liberation of the so-called untouchables one of the primary passions of his life. But not many people have recognized the incredible fight he put up for women's rights, equality of women. So in Gandhi's Hinduism, women have a very, very, very powerful part. So this also I wanted to underline.
Some months ago, you were in conversation with Harsh Mandar on the occasion of the 100th anniversary of the founding of the RSS, a member of which, was the person who assassinated Gandhiji. And Harsh began by asking you why you thought Gandhi was killed. I just met Harsh just a few days ago because I've just returned from India, and he was remembering that conversation. Your answer was very striking. Basically, you said that people tend to think that the RSS hated Gandhi because of his so called appeasement of Muslims. But actually, in your view, he stopped being Mahatma for these Hindu supremacists because of his anti caste stance. Can you talk about this, particularly in light of Gandhi's disagreement with Ambedkar on that question of a separate electorate for India's Dalits, which is seen by many as a betrayal of Dalits and opposition to caste?
Thank you. Yes, I'm very glad to try and address this question of Gandhi and caste, Gandhi and his fight for dignity for all Hindus and all Indians, and how that also annoyed the Hindu far right very, very profoundly. Now you referred to Gandhi's disagreement with Ambedkar, Ambedkar's disagreement with him, and the fast unto death, and then Ambedkar signing the famous Gandhi-Ambedkar Pact in Pune. Now, shortly thereafter, that pact was signed in September of 1932, almost 100 years ago. We forget that soon it will be 100th anniversary of that pact. Yet in our political discussions, we speak about it as if it happened earlier this morning or yesterday. September 32, Gandhi and Ambedkar signed this pact in a prison in Pune. Ambedkar had gone to prison where Gandhi was being kept by the British, and they together signed that pact. Shortly thereafter, in 33 and 34, Gandhi was by this time out of prison, and he spent a great deal of time traveling to all parts of India on the sole issue of fighting untouchability. Not fighting caste quite, but passionately fighting for Dalit rights, equal rights in temples and everywhere. And on that campaign, 33 and 34, there were at least 2 attempts to kill him. One in Pune and one in Bihar, in a place called Giridih, Giridih, Bihar. So there was this fanatical opposition to Gandhi because he dared to tackle this question of hierarchy, inequality, cruelty within the Hindu society. So, this is one of the incredible riddles of all time, that a Hinduism that claims that God is man, man is God, we are God, God is us. There's no difference between the Almighty and human beings, and yet builds these incredible differences within Hindu society among human beings. Advaita on the one hand, and cruel untouchability on the other. So that incredible contradiction had to be tackled, and Gandhi was one of those who, with his life, tackled it. But of course, the Gandhi-Ambedkar difference is another very important question, and whenever you want, I'm happy to speak a bit about it.
Well, you can let me ask my next question, and you can include that in your answer. So let me, or a couple, let me ask this. A few years ago, when Anand Teltumde was in prison, Hindus for Human Rights brought you as Gandhi's grandson and Anand Teltumde's wife, Rama Teltumde, who is Ambedkar's granddaughter, together for a poignant Ambedkar Jayanti webinar. And that of course is April 14th. And it was exactly 1 year prior to that, on April 14th, that they arrested Anand Teltumde. If Gandhi and Ambedkar were both alive today, I believe that despite these very fundamental and perhaps irrevocable disagreements, they would be together in the fight against Hindutva. So first of all, do you agree? And second, what can we do to bring together Gandhians and Ambedkarites in what I believe is necessary, what we talked about in that webinar as being necessary, which is a second freedom struggle. And in answering that, you can also talk about the disagreement between Gandhi and Ambedkar.
Sure. Now, first of all, since you've asked the question about whether Gandhi and Ambedkar, if they were alive today, would they stand together to fight against extreme Hindu nationalism, Hindutva? Absolutely. I mean, there is no question about it. There's absolutely no question whatsoever about it. Now, you have mentioned 2 of my books. Let me show a third book. This I wrote a few years ago. It's called Founding Fathers, an inquiry into the Indian Republic's beginnings. So this has several chapters, short chapters on the Ambedkar-Gandhi relationship. And I want to quote here something from Ambedkar. Now, as many of you may or may not know, in 1941, Ambedkar wrote a very important book called Thoughts on Pakistan. 1941, Thoughts on Pakistan. And he was one of those who said he didn't like the idea, but he felt that maybe it was unavoidable. In 1945, there was a second edition of this book published. So I'm now quoting from Dr. Ambedkar's preface to the second edition of Thoughts of Pakistan, published in 1945. And this is what Ambedkar writes. The political objection to Hindu Raj is that Hindu society is not a democratic society. True, it is not. If Hindu Raj does become a fact, these are Dr. Ambedkar's words quoted from his preface to the book Thoughts on Pakistan, 1945. Quote, if Hindu Raj does become a fact, it will no doubt be the greatest calamity for this country. Hindu Raj must be prevented at any cost. Unquote. So this is where Gandhi and Ambedkar stand on the question of Hindu Raj. And then let us never forget that Dr. Ambedkar became the law minister of the government of India under Jawaharlal Nehru with Vallabhbhai Patel. Not only with Gandhi's consent, but really, according to many sources, Gandhi's prodding. Gandhi urges Nehru and Patel to enlist Dr. Ambedkar, and they do. And Dr. Ambedkar is the architect of our constitution, which guarantees equal rights, which abolishes untouchability, which indirectly or directly even seeks to abolish caste. So I will speak about the Gandhi-Ambedkar differences, but let us not forget the tremendously significant partnership between Ambedkar and Gandhi as India was being liberated and as India drafted the constitution. Now, on their differences, let us recognize that Gandhi, who has this vision of an equal Hindu society where there is no one high, no one low. This Gandhi always said there should be no one high, no one low. Even when he seemingly seemed to defend the caste system, he absolutely insisted that no one will be first, no one will be last, everybody will be equal. But he did have some sweet words for the caste Hindus. He did not denounce the caste system the way Ambedkar wanted him to denounce. Ambedkar's annihilation of caste is unanswerable. But then Gandhi has to have the caste Hindus also in the freedom movement. He can't let the caste Hindus be taken over by the Hindu right. So he does have some sugared words seemingly for the caste system. But if you really examine them, they are just sugar coating. And Gandhi wants, as much as Dr. Ambedkar, he wants equality and no superiority and no inferiority without openly denouncing for some time. But in 36, he, in capital letters in his journal, he writes the caste system must be abolished, or some words to that effect. So he comes down to it, because as long as the freedom movement is at an early stage, is not yet on a winning spree, he can't make enemies of all the caste Hindus. He's a political leader of millions and millions of people. But when freedom seemed clearly arriving on the horizon, Gandhi then intensifies and radicalizes his language also, even against the caste system.
Something you once told me, and I'm just really moved by this, and I don't think most people know this, is that, and correct me if this is wrong. In the beginning of Gandhiji's life, he was against intercaste and mixed marriages. And by the end of his life, he would only bless an alliance if it is intercaste or
Yes,
interfaith. Can you
absolutely,
talk about
absolutely.
this? Can you talk
Yes,
about?
from sometime in the late 1930s, he made it, he had this ashram also in Sevagram in Maharashtra, in middle of India. And there were several marriages between Dalits and non-Dalits that Gandhi blessed at the Sevagram ashram. And he made it a public rule that he would only bless marriage among Hindus if it was a marriage between Dalit and a caste Hindu. This was Gandhi's well-established practice for many years.
Well, staying on the caste question, as you know, Hindus for Human Rights takes a resolute stand against not just untouchability, but caste in every way, shape, or form. In fact, our new project, Samadarshini, brings together Hindu religious leaders to do the theological work of articulating a Hindu path forward for these modern times without caste. Ambedkar himself said that Hindus don't need to look beyond our own sacred texts to find the guidance to reject caste, but what we lack is social will. And so, what are your thoughts and what is your outlook for a Hindu way forward jettisoning caste?
No, I think I'm thunderously in favor of Samadarshini. And so I agree that we must absolutely work in that direction. That is the right way to go. And along with fighting for Hindu-Muslim friendship and collaboration, and so these are not unrelated issues, and they're absolutely each effort will reinforce the other. So Hinduism can only go forward without caste, and I think one can also say Hinduism will only go forward if it understand its own wisdom about tolerance and acceptance. Tolerance, acceptance, not just tolerance, as Vivekananda said in Chicago. We accept all religions as true. So if Islam is also true, then a mosque also, we can honor a mosque. We can be glad that a mosque exists. We need not be horrified that a mosque exists.
I'm going to move us in a different direction,
Okay.
which is, of course, connected. You're 90 years old, and you have written 2 books this year. Do You Know Your Hinduism? And then this wonderful biography of African American pastor and civil rights leader, Reverend James Lawson, whom you credit as being the person who knew more about Gandhi and his nonviolent direct action or satyagraha than anyone else in America. Reverend Lawson, whom many people don't know of, passed away 2 years ago, almost to the day. This past year has actually seen the death of several very important civil rights satyagrahis, including Bernard Lafayette, John Lewis, Claudette Colvin, Jesse Jackson. You've been working on this book for many years, and it was very important for you to complete it. And I loved your book, Rajmohanji, because it not only told the important story of a great but lesser known satyagrahi, it also intertwined Reverend Lawson's story with a little bit of your own story and your focus on African American history, rights and the civil rights movement. Just as Reverend Lawson spent his life studying Gandhi and applying his nonviolent civil disobedience strategy to the American context, including 3 years in Nagpur, 1953 to 56, you too have spent a lifetime with interest in deeply understanding African American resistance. You mentioned that Bayard Rustin, who's my favorite civil rights leader, visited your family home soon after Gandhiji's assassination when you would have been 12. And as a young man, 10 years later, you were 22, you traveled through the south of this country trying to understand the role of nonviolent civil disobedience in the civil rights movement. And I'll add, Hindus for Human Rights has tried to deeply engage with the civil rights movement throughout our 7 years because we think it's critical that we remember that the rights we enjoy as immigrants in America, those rights were won through the sacrifices, ultimate sacrifices in many cases, of civil rights leaders and the movement. We repeatedly return to Selma and consider it nothing short of pilgrimage to hallowed land. We brought you together in conversation with Reverend William Barber, the one person in America doing the most to continue the legacy of MLK, Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., through the Poor People's Campaign. So, can you talk about why this book, the Reverend Lawson biography, was so important to you to complete, and why you think it's important for those of us who care deeply about Indian democracy to engage with the American civil rights movement?
Well, thank you for this very important question. And on Bayard Rustin, not only did he visit our family home after Gandhi's assassination, he stayed in our home for several days. So I was 12 or 13 or so, and it was a delight to be with him. And you're right that in 1957, when I was 22, I did travel to much of the US South, and along with some wonderful colleagues in what used to be then called moral rearmament and was later called initiatives of change. I met Dr. King when he was 29 years old. He was a very young man. I met his father, who was a fiery pastor. Daddy King was not as gentle as his son was in speech, but he was a very remarkable person. So I had those opportunities to understand the American civil rights movement or equal rights movement. And so, yes, I had heard about Reverend James Lawson much before I started working on his biography. But I could only meet him first in 2019. And soon after that, I started to work on his biography. But then COVID intervened and other things intervened. And the project took longer than I would have liked, but I'm only sad, of course, that Reverend Lawson is no more with us to look at this book. But I had the privilege of having many, many, many long conversations with him on the phone. And he helped me very much. And I can only say that his character, his personality, his demeanor, his approach, his laughter, his friendship, his deep knowledge about Gandhi and about so many aspects of. So he was, people rightly say, of course, they link Gandhi and King together. And you mentioned Reverend William Barber, but I think that Lawson and Barber and King and Gandhi, they all stand together. And and so many, as you've pointed out, James Lawson spent 3 years in India studying Gandhi. So if I spend a few years studying Lawson, wonderful. It's exactly what should happen. And here I may just make an additional point. By now, as has been already observed, many of us Indians are living all over the world. We're living in Africa, we're living in North America, South America, Europe, everywhere. How many of us have studied and written about our new homes? In my various books, large and small, about Indian history, I was benefited by researches by many scholars from all parts of the world. All kinds, Japanese, Portuguese, Spanish, everybody. So why shouldn't now people of Indian origin be pioneers in studying the African American story? Why shouldn't we be pioneers in understanding the Latino story, the Native American story? In Canada, in Australia, why shouldn't we be pioneers in understanding the indigenous story? So I hope that this 90-year-old man, towards the end of his life, has made a modest attempt to embrace all of humanity in a practical way. And I hope that this example will be followed and bettered by scores of others.
Thank you. Reverend Lawson had an experience as a child that you write about in the book, where he had a fight with another little child, and his mother's response was to urge him to, because it was a physical fight, and his mother's response was to urge him to think of Jesus's teaching of unconditional love. And then you think of Gandhiji. He taught us to fight the British, but not to hate the British.
Yeah.
And then I was thinking of Fannie Lou Hamer, who said, and I'm quoting, "We are not fighting against these people because we hate them, but we are fighting these people because we love them, and we're the only thing that can save them now." And then there's James Baldwin, who said, and I'm quoting, "The really terrible thing, old buddy, is that you must accept them. And I mean that very seriously. You must accept them and accept them with love, for these innocent people have no other hope. They are in effect still trapped in a history which they do not understand." Just yesterday, I had a conversation about loving one's enemy with a young student who's here in New York from Gaza. And as you can imagine, it was a very, very hard conversation. And my question is, do you think that we can truly, as a species, learn to love exactly that which is destroying us? My young Palestinian friend that I was talking to yesterday had a very um, spontaneous response to this question, which is that the question itself doesn't make sense. It's illogical to think that you can love the person that is committing a genocide against you. And while we can appreciate and even aspire to this huge unconditional love, we must also listen to this young man and what he is saying. And so how do you think of this notion that's at the heart of satyagraha, of everything we've been talking about, and at the heart of, the core Hindu values that we've been talking about, which is not seeing a difference between one and another and actually loving your enemy?
You may not be, but I think it may be too much to expect love of the enemy while the enemy is about to shoot you. That is not even to be advocated, I would say. I think at that stage, one would advocate, if you can't subdue the enemy, find a quick way of escaping. That would be the first. Not love this man who's about to kill you, but stop him or make an escape. That would be my advice. But What about the children of the person who is, you have escaped, you're somewhere else? Will you now pick up a gun and try and find the child of that man to kill that child?
Yeah.
So understand the other person is also a human being. So I think this non-violence has to be understood in a very practical and even a strategic sense, not in a foolish sentimental sense. But I think it has to be understood, because if we agree that because a Palestinian has committed an act of violence against an Israeli, therefore all Israelis must take revenge on every single Palestinian till the end of time, where will we get? So, so not hating the race or the people from which brutal action emerges is very sound. There's nothing foolish or what's the word, unnatural about it.
To bring it back to Hinduism, in this world marked by war, genocide, deepening hate, can our core Hindu concepts like ahimsa, for instance, help in these practical ways that you're talking about actually respond to these crises across the globe, and how? What would it mean for Hinduism, to actually be part of a moral rearmament, to remain morally serious?
I think this, I would, in attempting to respond, I would go back to this notion of listening to the stranger and getting to know the stranger, embracing the stranger, entering his or her world. That if we live in the US as Indians or as Hindus, what about all the others who are living in the US? Is there space for them in my heart and mind? Is there space for their books in my library, on my shelves? Do I make an attempt to get to know them? So do I merely have opinions about them and unchanged opinions, stubborn opinions, or do I get to know them more and revise my opinions? I think this notion of knitting ourselves with others by listening to them, by learning more about them, is one step forward. But of course, resisting domination, evil, non-violently is a very tough and a very powerful tool still.
Let me quote you to yourself from this book, on the same vein. You say, perhaps the question is of where our minds travel. We can climb vertically into our imagined past and savor the presumed glory there, or we can enter horizontally into the lives of our compatriots, our neighbors of different castes and creeds, and see if we can lower the pain we may find there. To both exercises, we seem to give the name Hinduism. May we choose the benevolent one? So I ask these questions for all of us as individuals, and also on behalf of our joint endeavor here, Hindus for Human Rights. How do we make that choice in practice today? What does it require of us? What values should Hindus consciously choose to uphold? And what narratives must we be willing to challenge or entirely leave behind? And for our organization, what can Hindus for Human Rights do to support our community in making the right choice? As we named our event, where do we go from here? And that is my final question.
So I think we should leave this conversation with your question rather than with any answer from me. That is where I would like to end it.
Thank you, Rajmohan ji. This has been, I've been waiting to have this conversation with you, and I'm very grateful that you gave us this time. Just truly filled with the love that you bring to everything that you do, including this little organization of ours.